dams, etc. We'll dive into that a little bit, but on a more broad basis is the entire supply chain. So if you think about recycling of materials of pre and post consumer, interesting statistic is there's something like 6 to 8 million tons of copper that's not recycled each year, and at $10,000 a ton, that's a massive economic opportunity for someone at some point. Thrifting is another area where we use less of our resources, and it's naive, I think, as a mining sector to think all the users of metals are not obsessed about using less of it, making it cheaper, lightweighting, and ultimately substitution, because they're driven by cost, supply chain risk, national security issues, and finally, ultimately, substitution of these materials. For example, I know the Rice University in the US is working on a carbon composite material to replace copper. So there's all these forces swirling around, and the question we're going to have is, what role does mining have in those as well? So, and my provocation is always that I think a valuable company of the future is actually going, not a mining company, but a materials provider. And it's kind of a reframing of how we think in a mindset shift, so that we're providing materials that have characteristics, and primary production is not the sole source of those materials. So we're going to kind of jump into this firstly. So Petar, public policy. So we notice from other industries like plastic recycling, garments, whatever, public policy really has an important role in driving kind of the whole circular economy and doing everything I've just talked about. So where are we at in the metals industry globally? Are there any little green shoots out there for us to look at, or where are we at?
Yeah, we are just starting. In fact, the beauty of the Chilean success case in the mining industry through circular economy is that it was bottom up. It started with entrepreneurs, it started with suppliers, and it started to grow from there through success cases, which I think is the right way to do it, by the way. And then the policymakers started to take notice that there was a business case, there was a social case, and an environmental case for circularity. And right now we are working with governments, for example, in Chile and Latin America, to make this happen and to have incentives in promoting circularity in the mining sector. We were discussing earlier that we see circular economy in the mining industry in two parallel streams. One is the waste generated in the process, but the other one that I think it's really interesting for all the mining countries is the one related with capital equipment. And there you can have the triple impact of economic growth, high quality jobs created locally, and decarbonization of your processes. So that's something we're working together, not only with the governments, but with other countries like Australia, in order to promote this transition towards circularity.
Great, thanks you, Petar. We'll probably dive a little bit more into this, because I think public policy is key. Michelle, we're going to kind of some comments around inside the fence.
Yeah.
And the importance of things like ore body knowledge and other areas and application of technology to help maximize the opportunity we have and value of the resource inside the fence. Do you want to kind of unpack that for us?
Yeah, sure. So obviously I'm a geoscientist by background, so that's when I think about the circular economy, I do think about the waste material, or the ore and the waste material first and foremost, and how we can play in that space and what we can do through characterization. And I think that there's four opportunities that I think present us. The first is around the reduce piece in the first place. What are ways that we can mine that reduce the amount of material that we're moving around? The precision mining type applications that you see a lot of people talking about, more talking than doing. And also, that's the precision at the mining phase. There's also how do you optimize the extraction further down the chain by truly understanding the ore body in the first place. Really simple things like actually fully characterising all of the metals that are present in the first place. We've got a terrible habit as an industry. If we think something's a gold mine, then we assay for gold and we don't bother to assay for everything else. Gives people great opportunities later to go and extract other metals from the tailings. But imagine if we knew in the first place all of the metals that were present. And indeed, what if we also characterised the waste materials? Again, we're starting to see people look for opportunities to use all of the material, not just the ore, to take some of those waste streams, to use them to make, road base and all of those other materials. All of those, characterization is the first step in all of that, to be able to really make sure you're optimizing and using everything that sits within the material.
So, and we have a ways to go there, right? All body characterization, I suspect.
Sadly, it is, not something that we necessarily do particularly well, and not because we can't. There's no shortage of technologies that allow things like that to happen. It's more, I think, around people thinking through that full economic benefit and what are the optionality that gets unlocked by truly characterizing in the first place.
Okay, cool, very good. Alan, collaboration incentives. What role are they playing in all of this? And again, what should we be doing if we're not doing it already?
Well, I think one of the distinguishing factors of the circular economy is sort of integration throughout supply chains. It's no longer just the burden of the industry, but it's the partnerships through supply chains to close loops, to create efficiencies. And the good news is that the pressure from the downstream sectors, electronics, automotive, green energy, and the finance community is really driving this. And I think they're sending the signals that we want verifiable, responsible sourcing of minerals, but they become a partner in that. So the good news about the opportunities around collaboration and coordination is that it shares the burden, and it also shares the benefits in a much more stable way over time. That creates that stability. That partnership brings more resources to the table, which then encourage innovation. Arguably, one of the problems we've had with the ESG movement so far, it's lacked that coordination, it's lacked that collaboration. So one end is asking for something in a very imprecise and often unhelpful way. By bringing these together, we can do a much more targeted, much more efficient use of investments in responsible sourcing in this variety of ways, so that we know from the beginning to the end, through data, through policy, and through markets, that we're getting what we asked for and we're producing what is being asked for. It sounds like a simple thing, but it's not being done now, as you all know. And I think that's the opportunity, is that the circularity demands kind of a system approach. The current market is creating very strong incentives for both buyers and producers to get it right, and that opportunity for working together means not only a much more precise delivery of the objectives and the outcomes, but it also means that there are, what's the right word? I think it lowers the confusion, increases the efficiency of transactions, and I think will ultimately allow us to, as I say, share that burden and share those benefits much more effectively than has been done in the very dislocated ESG world that has evolved sort of organically out of that.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. I think important areas. First question, do we have a paradox here, if you like? And the paradox being that, and I think Madeleine King kind of reflected on this in her opening talk, which the AFR reported on, which was, if we do all the things we're talking about, environmental, social, circularity, we may actually make the industry uncompetitive because we're piling on cost. And we know low-cost production is really king when it comes to everything. So is the paradox, if we say we need to be doing these things, that all we're going to do is add cost, therefore that's a disincentive, so we just get stuck in the status quo. So if that is a paradox, how do we break that paradox? How do we, because there's a lot of things underneath this, how do we change that? Because I think that's where we may be. So who wants to tackle that? So Petar, and then Alan, and Michelle,
No, absolutely no. In fact, we've seen through many success cases in the mining industry that circularity allows you to save money. We've seen in capital equipment savings up to 50%, up to 80% in remanufacturing and retaining the value. I once again give a shout out to the last report on remanufacturing of our friends from Carey in Australia that showed the huge benefits, economical benefits of remanufacturing, but also it allows you to create local jobs and also. And it happened to us as a supplier. It moves you to do things right. And by doing things right, for example, using renewable energy, in our case, we're saving up to 30, 40% in our energy bills. And that is exactly what is going on also for the mining industry. So definitely no. I think that's the difference between the previous stage of sustainability or maybe social responsibility, that it represented a cost. Circular economy represents savings for the mining industry and for the suppliers.
Okay.
Yeah.
It.
I liked how emphatic you were. It was good. And I mean, I do think, there is still risk that it gets perceived that way, because it does, require, the way we think about things when we're thinking about changing ways of mining, there's always, risk that people see the upfront capital cost of doing that, as opposed to normally the lower ongoing costs of production if you can mine in more efficient ways.
Sure.
So I think, there's some risk around the balance of that. And I think as well as reducing cost base, though, there are opportunities here around some of these ideas of using more of the material and creating new revenue streams. Actually, there's upside opportunity there, but again, that's a different way of thinking and probably a different economic paradigm than the one we're used to when we mine a primary metal, create an NPV that therefore puts a value on the mine and prosecute against it. It's a very different logic to that.
No, I like it. The mindset, new paradigms. I like it. Not always easy, not easy to get to sometimes. Alan.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've been working on mining reform issues for almost 30 years, and a lot of it was focused on harm reduction and liability management. And this is the rise of the circular economy paradigm has changed that whole thing, because the only reason it's low cost is because you're just writing off liabilities for future generations. You're carrying huge liabilities over time. If those come onto the books, and that's what's happening with climate, biodiversity, and indigenous rights, suddenly those low costs don't look so low anymore. So the idea of taking waste as a resource not only lowers those liabilities which are coming onto main stage, it creates both savings and whole new revenue sources as the resource to waste reality comes in. The fact that this is not common practice is kind of mind-boggling to anybody outside the industry, but we all know it's not common practice. So the waste inventories, the resource needs analyses that create whole new markets, we are leaving billions of dollars on the table that could well be into the coffers of mining companies and their partners. We only do that because of bad accounting. Yeah. Now this is a better accounting, and to Petar's point, we're moving from sustainability as a high-cost hair shirt to circularity as a profound potential business growth area, not just for the mining companies themselves, but to your point earlier about supply chains. And this is the shared benefit, shared burden model that it's going to end up on the right side of the ledger. I'm absolutely convinced of that.
So let's go down this hole a bit further, no pun intended. So obviously it's a nascent industry opportunity, which is we've got a lot of minerals sitting inside tailing dams. There's emerging technology and opportunity, but it's still on the margin. Yeah. So let's take, and I live in the US, so there's an obsession with rare earth metals, etc. And we know that some of the best rare earth deposits are actually inside tailing dams. And Michelle, to your point, it's not economic for mining companies to extract those minerals because they're focused on copper or gold. So everything ends up in tailings. So what is needed to push it out of the margin? It could be just a national security imperative, say, but what takes this away from the margin and become mainstream so we do extract every single resource that's in a mine? Michelle, do you want to take the first step of that one since you brought it up?
Wow, and it is really interesting because I think as you say it, you go, well, we need these metals. We actually know that they're sitting here in tailings. Why does it sit on the edge? And I think some of it does seem it's not technology. That there's obviously some of it is. It's the reason the material sits in the tails is because the conventional processing techniques might not have taken it out, or because they didn't know they were there in the first place. So there is a technology piece here around how do you process those materials effectively. But actually, again, sadly, I suspect a lot of it is just around economic treatment, right? Bad accounting, as you just described. How do you get people to truly say, well, actually, at the moment, this sits as a massive liability on my balance sheet. Instead, I could be using it as a source of revenue. Yeah. How does that shift happen? And then I think on top of all of that is just the regulatory complexity here of doing a new thing that people haven't thought about.
Yeah, absolutely. Petar?
We were discussing this in some other panel that I think waste is defined by the stage of technology development you're at. Mm-hmm. It happened to us in the Atacama Desert in the 19th century. We had the saltpeter industry that produced huge mountains of waste that in the 21st century they were gold mines.
Yeah.
Because right now you have the technology to do so. And that's an important point we always make from our Center of Innovation and Circular Economy. You cannot disconnect circularity with the fourth industrial revolution. The only way to transition towards circularity is through the industry 4.0 technologies that are available right now and that have democratized the access to these technologies. And I think we are right in the midst of this huge change in the industry. And I think that's really exciting also for the new generations that saw the mining industry as a legacy, old, mature industry, but now they are seeing, it's happening also for agriculture, by the way, but it's making an exciting industry full of opportunities, and we said that also earlier, that waste is valuable resources put on the wrong hands. So that's what we're doing right now in the mining industry.
One man's waste is another man's ore.
Exactly.
As they say, somebody's waste is someone else's treasure.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, Alan?
Absolutely.
Well, I think all of those points are also unfolding in this context of we know the supply can't meet the demand. So we are going to have to go to places where that supply is. Canada, we have thousands, literally, of existing tailings facilities, both closed and in design for closure, thousands. And when we're talking with First Nations who are considering whether or not their social license is something they would grant, one of the questions is, what have you done with your existing mess and your existing resources before you open up new land? So part of the dialogue is certainly going to be about, you only get to go forward if you've taken care of the back. So I think the dynamics around that are complex and are going to be part of the equation. But I think we should also focus on things like silica. I mean, there was a really interesting presentation recently about the importance of tailing sands. Municipalities and many other regions are desperate for infrastructure materials, and some of these are not suited by local needs in quarrying or other things. And if nothing else, we have lots of in this industry, it's silicas, and huge. It's a low value, it's a low cost, high value response that can build the partnerships and fill real needs in regions. So there's the micro elements, which are going to be increasingly precious and technologically complex, but there will be more value in that. But there's also, let's look at the other basic wastes around mine operations, whether it's the materials on products and services or the stuff in the tailings. And the stuff that we don't even put on our books anymore could and should be part of a discussion on circularity at a regional and national level.
Let's pursue this economic opportunity and grab it by the tail, and let's use copper. So we're going to go outside the fence now. So if we believe people should react to an economic opportunity, copper's a great one. So let's say the stats from the Copper Alliance say anything between 5 to 7 million tons of copper, pre-consumer waste, post-consumer, is not recycled.
Yep.
I mean, that's hundreds of billions of dollars of annual economic opportunity, yet nothing's happening. Still sitting there, and the rate of capture is not increasing much. So if that's not being reacted to by the industry, downstream or upstream, so I mean, how do you get that to be all captured, especially with the growth of copper? Because that's a big number. Mm-hmm. So how do we solve for that? So if no one's moving on that, then why would they move on waste and all the other stuff in the fence? So let's just pick on copper. So is it public policy? Is it economic?
Well, certainly public policy. I mean, we have one of the problems that the industry faces is that it's sort of hamstrung by policy that was set on a waste management model that is, 20th century to be generous, but often impedes the ability to use waste and transport that waste in a way that could treat it as a resource. So we do have some handcuffs on existing policy that really need to be rethought. I'm speaking in the North American context, but I assume it's elsewhere. So there are a lot of impediments to the movement of waste materials in whatever form. They're there for a reason, to prevent harm, but excessive and imprecise if you want to do this. So that's certainly one element of it. In the Canadian context, kind of like Australia, whether it's smelter capacity or recycling capacity, because we've got small markets, one of the problems is the consolidation of those materials in sufficient scale to allow the investment within existing smelting processes to really use that. That's solvable. Again, there are policy issues that can incentivize that and enable that. And there's also infrastructure that can be built. So it's scaling and focusing the availability of those wastes as a resource. And then there's the public policy environment that allows them to prioritize the secondary sources in a way that is still safe for the public, but creates, economic levels of opportunity.
Yeah, I think point, public policy to encourage it, but then capital allocation to do it and scale, and then the complexity of collection and movement of material to where it's needed, I think are big areas for sure. So Petar, you wanted to jump there?
As an entrepreneur, as a business person, I'm a practical guy, and in the Chilean context, I think that's the beauty of it, that you need to make people change their mind with actual success cases. And that's exactly what happened there. It started with such simple cases, repairing, remanufacturing, and the operating people started to make sense of the circular economy, and it started to scale up. And it moved to the management level, then it moved to the policies, and I think that's the way we need to move. And that's why venues like this are so important, to show that there's a business model in capital equipment, in the waste that generated in the process, but we need to show these success cases and to start making sense of people that this is a business case.
That is a business case, absolutely. Michelle?
I mean, there's probably like an environment within an environment, as you're talking about, where this can happen, where within any given mining operation can be recycling its own copper as a starting point, and that's some of those smaller layers of success. And there's also just the flippant answer that why can't when the price of copper goes up and demand stays too low because we're not finding copper at the rate that we need to, whether the macros will just shift this in the end anyway. So it'll be interesting to watch.
So if you go, I mean, I don't think anyone argues, circular economy is good, the opportunity is there. But if you go to other sectors, for example, I mean, there's good and bad, right? Plastics. I mean, even the plastic industry supposedly is very obsessed about recycling. I mean, yet, they aren't able to produce recycled plastic at a lower cost than new plastic. Okay, and the recycling rates are actually, even though there's millions and millions of tons of recycled plastic, most of it's not recycled. And they've got policy, they've got all the things, yet it's not moving at the pace we want. And downstream wants recycled, but they won't pay more for it. So I'm kind of thinking, as you look at these other sectors, and on the other hand, you get lead, which is 100% recycled, and lead batteries in the US at least. What lessons can we draw out from these good and bad cases to help accelerate? The danger is we all say it's a good thing, but it actually always stays on the margin and never becomes mainstream for a whole bunch of reasons. So how do we accelerate this? And last thing inside that, what's the role of the mining companies outside the fence? Do we just leave this to everybody else, or should we push more heavily into non-primary production sources of these minerals? So double-barreled question.
I have a podcast on circular economy, so I talk to all kind of different industries, 200 episodes.
Email them about it.
200 episodes, there you go. Everything you need to know.
And I've talked a lot to the plastic industry, and the thing that I can get like a good idea is that they go out there. They go out there, and for the last 2 years, I've seen the mining industry going out there. For the last 5 years in Chile, you didn't see a mining company name nowhere. Now you see it on TV, on the and they made that switch, and they are going out there to teach, to say, hey, we're important first. That's the most important thing for me. That they need to say, these critical minerals are key for the green future. They are recyclable. They are vital for this transition. So first of all, we need to work with the mining industry and make them public as these other industries. But in the plastic industry, for example, we always say that the material is great, the technology is great, but you have a problem in the process, in the end of the life cycle. So I think that that's something we can get from this industry is like more publicity or more engagement with the public.
Sure, yeah, I think it's good. Yeah. Alan, I mean, particularly on collaboration, I want you to kind of capture to what extent should we be collaborating downstream as well, all the way to end user companies?
Absolutely.
Well.
No, I think you use the term the materials solutions provider and the opportunity of the reframing. Not all companies are going to be able to do the full amount, but the opportunity will be there to help define the outcomes, define the framing, address issues of capacity, address the kinds of incentives that are going to be needed, jointly address the finance community about helping to deliver those. So the industry has a fundamental role and a huge opportunity, a complete reframing as the solution provider in the context of green energy minerals. So I think that is a no-brainer. I think there are a couple of things that, just two things about lessons from other work. I used to be the managing director of Circular Economy Leadership Canada, and we spent several years working on the Canada Plastics Pact in the context of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's global plastic pact. There's a lot they did, I can tell you, that has saved years and millions of dollars by working in collaboration on market and regulatory things together, what I call the pre-competitive environment. That's not happening yet in the industry, but I think that is really, really important that we bring regional voices and folks interested to work together to define the space and to frame the space in a way and to share lessons, share case studies and others. But the beauty of minerals is that they're the perfect circular substance. Ultimately durable. The more you go through them, the less it costs to process them in most cases, assuming you're not bending them into alloys. So unlike plastics, unlike agriculture, there is a long-term economic play that in some cases may lead to leasing mineral values instead of purchasing them or selling them. But more importantly, the long-term minerals economy in circularity will run in perpetuity, and the math on that is much more compelling than anything in agriculture, plastics, or otherwise. So on the one hand, we need to work together to realize this at a more effective local and global level. On the other hand, we've got a much better business case to start from.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to make the point actually that we had a natural advantage here when it came to circularity that things like plastics don't have. We are, there's a lot of reason for optimism, to be optimistic about what we can do. And I might tackle the second part of your question a little bit around, I think about these things always as, core capabilities. I think there's an opportunity for us to be involved in recycling, and the reason why we might choose to be as miners is because we have core capabilities around mineral processing, right? It's a core capability we have. So why wouldn't you look to leverage that into new areas?
Yeah. Absolutely, and particularly, Peter, you mentioned this, is the energy savings alone, as energy intensity in mining goes up for primary production. You're talking 45% savings, heavily in copper recycling, it's 85% less energy. I mean, just that number alone should trigger opportunity. Last thing is, if we believe what we're talking about is very disruptive to the industry, and you think about other industries, disruption never happens from within the industry itself. It always comes, you look at unconventional oil and gas, the majors thought it would never happen. Somebody else did it, they're getting into it now. But every industry you go through, disruption comes from some other element of the industry or totally outside the industry. So is that what's going to happen in mining here? Or do you think the mining companies are going to lean in? So any hypothesis or any predictions here? Peter, you're going to jump in.
I think two things. One, the supplier side started this change, at least in the Chilean case. But I'm also really interested in what is happening with the end user. The car manufacturers, yesterday, Apple presented his new iMac Mini or whatever with full recycled material, carbon neutral. So they are pushing the mining industry to do things better, to do things the right way, and also to like a kind of a threat that, hey, we want to use recycled metals, not virgin metals. So that at least makes you start doing things better.
Yeah.
But those are the two sides. Inside the supplier side,
Yep.
we are doing a lot on circularity,
Yep.
reducing scope 3 for the mining industry, which is really, really important, also for the end user, and the end user with this new mindset of using metals.
2 pressure points. Yep.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, are there any other industries we can think of that are as conservative as the mining industry in terms of culture and practice? I mean, the basic business model, which is a 98, 99% waste production and a byproduct that you make your profit from, that business model has been around for far too long. So it's ripe for disruption, especially in a supply constrained world. So absolutely. I remember a speech, I just was remembering this, it was some years ago, and one of the CEOs who was retiring came in and said, you know guys, we fought the labor revolution and the organized labor revolution, and this was back in the 60s. We lost, and we're better for it. Safety is up, retention is up, all of these things. Then the environmental movement came along, and we fought that because gross levels of pollution. We lost, and we're better for it. We've created considerable efficiencies, much greater relationships internally. And then at the time, he was talking about social and governance issues, which are related to consent and others. He said, guys, are we going to fight this one too? Because we know what's going to happen. We're going to lose, and we're going to be better for it. So disruption will happen. It has happened, and it will continue to happen. The good news about this one is it's not just cost savings, but it's value realization and a whole level of social partnership that is going to consolidate the industry's role in the future. So yes, disruption is happening. Some companies see it coming and see it part of their business solution. Others are wishing it would go away, but realizing it probably won't. And so if you want to future-proof your company and your industry, you start to realize that this is a fight you don't want to lose, because if you won it, you'd be poorer for it.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. So Michelle, I'm not going to stop you saying this, but we're clock running down, so I'm going to ask each of you for a quick, you can use your answer for this one, quick 30-second takeaway, the one thing you want the audience to take away from our conversation to make them think differently. So Michelle, I'll start with you on that one.
I think it's about shifting it away from being a cost piece and an obligation to think this way and to think about it as an opportunity instead.
Yeah, I think that's really brilliant. Yeah, Petar?
We're living a paradigm shift, the fourth industrial revolution, and we think the economic model of this new revolution will be the circular economy. Yeah. And we always say circularity is inevitable, but it's not imminent.
Okay.
But we're moving that way.
Does it keep marching away from us? That's the thing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Petar.
And remember, circularity is an ancient concept. It's an indigenous concept.
Yes.
We've strayed from circularity because that is how natural systems work and how any responsible society. We've kind of lost the plot for a few decades, but we've got to get that back on. So this isn't something new. This is something old we've got to pick up because it works. But the one thing I would say, and this builds on what Peter is saying, is that this won't happen fast enough just by organic or competitive means. It's going to take more focused collaboration, because by getting it there together, we can build the tools, we can create the enabling conditions. This is going to take some focused work by folks who said, we got to accelerate the pace of this because there is an urgency, and that urgency is going to bring lots of opportunity, but it can't be done in isolated and bilateral ways. So we've got to find, and my challenge to you all in 2025 is make a commitment to be part of a more collective discussion on making this work for the industry and its partners. It won't happen organically, so let's think about how we do it together.
Great, thank you. And I think there's lots of good takeaways in this, but to me the biggest one is this is a new economic paradigm, because at the end of the day it's about the money, always. And we're an industry that's been locked into the same business model for far too long. And we just perpetuate a status quo that will be our undoing eventually if we don't respond to it. So please join me in thanking this tremendous set of three individuals. Michelle, Petar, Alan, thank you very much.